Welcome to the Holo Health Podcast, where we help you become healthy in every area of your life. On each episode, not only will we provide ways to improve your physical health, but also ways to improve your mental and spiritual health as well. I hope you enjoyed today's episode.
Holo Health, thank you so much for jumping back into an episode on the Holo Health Podcast. Hope you're doing well. We have a special guest in the studio. It's the good news. Bad news is I don't have my wingman, Trevor, RIP, even though he just has another obligation and couldn't join us today. So I'm in the studio with a very dear friend that I'm excited to kind of talk about how our paths intersected and just kind of God's whole working in that. But we have the one and only Ryan Tabor on the pod. Ryan, what's your primary emotion you're feeling right now?
Probably a little anxiety. This is it's only podcast number 2, but honestly, Alex, thank you for the invitation to be here. Trevor, wish you could be here too. But it's an honor to sit here before you today and just hang out with you and talk health and see what that looks like.
Well, I feel like the honor's mine because just our interaction and intersection over the past year really has really meant a lot to me. And it's been really kind of cool to see just our paths intersect and just kind of help one another and spur one another on and just kind of do life on life like that is what I'm really encouraged to kind of dig into a little bit and really uncover like, hey, what has the growth been for you like both on a personal level after engaging in with Holo Health, kind of like looking at health a different way and just kind of spitting it off that way? Because a lot of podcast conversations with Holo Health is we're going to interview an expert, we're going to talk about someone in their field, but this is like, hey, Ryan, you're an expert in your field as far as you work at a church. You do a lot of life one-on-one relational. You meet with a lot of couples. So you are very well versed in the relational and spiritual side of things working at a church. But you also have engaged in Holo Health and been like, hey, I want to prioritize some of my physical and mental and emotional health side of things because it's all impacted. And you kind of have some background that you'll share there. I'm talking too much. Ryan, for the people who are like, hey, who is Ryan Tabor? Give us the 60-second snapshot of all things you really quick so people get to know you.
Okay, great. Ryan Tabor, I'm 45. I work at Brownsbridge Church here in Cumming, Georgia. I'm married to my wife, Nicole. We've been married for 17 years. 2 daughters, Kendall and Reagan, 12 and 7. Wife and I, we met at college, Georgia, so big Dogs fans.
Go Dogs.
Go Dogs.
Every person's got to say it.
That's right. Been working at a church just sold 15 years at North Point Ministries. So
wait, did you get up and like walk the thing and your name displayed on the screen?
I did? Yeah. And Alex, you know me. Like I don't like the spotlight.
Yeah, don't like the spotlight.
Yeah. So got up there.
Wait, really quick. What was your walk-up song?
I did "Running Down a Dream" by Tom Petty.
Oh, such a classic.
Yeah, well, classic rock, that speaks my language
that's
too.
You.
So, yeah. So
really quick context, the organization that Ryan works for is a faith-based, has a bunch of churches in the Atlanta area. 15 years, when you hit a milestone, you pretty much walk up in front of the all staff and have a little celebration, have an all have a song and all that stuff. So that's kind of the context behind that. But anyways, keep going, Ryan.
That's right. So a lot of people are excited about that milestone, walking up, shaking our pastor's hand, fun walk-up music, whatever. I was just trying to get on and off the stage without falling, right? Like,
don't trip.
Hey, let's make the spotlight as minimal as possible. So, but yeah, it was cool. So, but my wife also works in ministry. She works at the church as well. So we try to sneak off and grab lunch dates here and there. So
love it.
Yeah,
love it.
Great.
And I've got the pleasure to know your wife, seen your kids, actually witness you baptize your daughter, go through what started as like a mentorship, but also turned into a friendship, which just turned into other Bible studies, which just turned into other breakfast dates, but also have done Holo Health together. So it's kind of cool to see our paths intersect.
Absolutely.
Ryan, do you remember when was the first time that our paths intersected? Was it that first session?
It was before that, but it was at Community Cup. I think we were sitting outside, if I'm not mistaken, and it was freezing out there, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
You had a hoodie, and then we were both just kind of shivering. Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, it was good times for sure.
That's funny. So, Ryan, take us back, like, the first portion of your life. Just kind of give us some context about more of your story, but really your health story and a kind of what has been your focus, your definition of health, what you've kind of done, just kind of like a little bit about you holistically as a person, Ryan.
Okay, and I don't know how far back you want me to go, but, I think really in college was where I first started to get an idea of health. And, so it was going to the gym on campus. It was, it was trying to get the biggest biceps and look as ripped as I could possibly be. And,
Right.
And honestly, that was just, I had never been taught about health from that standpoint. So that was really kind of my first exposure to, okay, what is health? Well, I'm looking around at other, 18, 19, 20-year-olds trying to define what health is. So,
Interesting.
that was probably my first exposure to it. But looking back, you're like, well, that's not exactly true, right? Like,
Right.
there's pieces of that are true. And one of my seminary professors always talked about how we rise and fall on our definitions, and it's so true. And so
Yes.
if we're living out a poor definition of health, we're not making progress, or we're making progress that is not sustainable or not ultimately healthy to our souls. So, yeah, I think college was the first experience
That's
of
good.
just, gosh, I got to get ripped. I got to get, got to add more weight. I got to do more reps. I got to do all these things. But quickly became burned out on that. I wasn't seeing the progress that I wanted to see. I wasn't looking like, my roommates. I wasn't looking like the guys that were, really squatting and benching all this weight. And so I was a little bit defeated. It was kind of crushing of like, why can't I get there? I'm trying to do all these things. And so I think that was, as I look back, that was just probably a misunderstanding of what health truly is.
Yeah. So, I mean, without deeper instruction or someone helping or really kind of giving an accurate definition, I mean, just thought it was physical health, just going to look good in the mirror and get big biceps, and pretty much that was health. How has that changed over really the past 12 to 18 months, your definition?
Yeah, well, certainly seeing health as a more holistic part of who I am, and the Whole Health program has helped me get there too. So
Yeah.
Looking at health from a physical, mental, emotional, relational aspect of life, it really kind of balances me to, at least the attempt to balance me and help me grow in a lot of different areas. And seeing that health and seeing myself grow emotionally or seeing myself grow physically, I think that's all part of it. But
Yeah.
I recognize that, it kind of ebbs and flows.
Yes.
One day your spiritual side might be, a 7, 8, 9.
Mm-hmm.
But, the physical side might be a 4 or 5. You
Yes.
might be, today I realized like I've been pretty sedentary. I've been sitting in front of a computer all day.
Right.
I've been sitting in front of a computer all week.
Yeah.
And maybe that's kind of taking a dip. So I think giving yourself grace is important, right? Like,
Yes.
it's not always going to be a trajectory of up and to the right.
Yes.
It's
exactly.
It's going to ebb and flow, and you've got to give yourself grace as you process through and as you experience growth in all these different areas.
So I'm curious because you mentioned like earlier in your life that health was very siloed, very segmented, very physical health only, and I'm just going to, the time I spend at the gym is health, and then I'm going to go do the rest of my life. Where now it's like, no, hey, health is me. Health is like all parts of me. And yeah, I'm going to go steward my physical health well, but I'm also going to make sure my mind and my soul are taken into consideration because they all impact one another. Where did that switch happen, and how did that happen as far as like it's only physical health and now it's holistic, and like how have you seen some of the benefits play into your life when you actually take care of yourself holistically rather than just focus on one area?
I mean, that's a really good question, and probably one that I don't have like a a set timeline of like this is when it happened.
Right.
I think it's been gradual, but it's just learning more about myself and who I am, and
Yeah.
Whether that's personality tests at work, or
Yes.
whether that's hearing from a seminary professor or somebody talking about the importance of self-care, or so it's been a journey. I don't think you get there overnight by any means, but just realizing like, hey, taking care of yourself is important. Okay, well, what does that look like? Getting out and just turning off the phone and taking a walk and just or being still, even being still before God. Just that practice of taking care of your soul in that manner. So I would say it was just a lot of different areas that played into it. And I don't know if it was a conversation that you and I had directly, or maybe it was in the program that we walked through. But there was a a time that you mentioned, hey, exercise is what you do for, 60 minutes a day. For some people. But movement is what you do the other 23 hours of the day.
Exactly.
And I have loved that because it is really redefined. Like, it's more about moving. It's more about being active and taking care of yourself in all those areas.
Yes.
Than just a quick fix of I'm going to hit the gym.
Yes.
4 times a week, 5 times a week, or for an hour each time. So I think I'm more mindful about okay, like. Let me do a walking meeting. I love that phrase that you talk about.
Yes.
Of taking a walking meeting, and just being able to move, whether it's throughout the day or just being intentional. Or hey, I want to take the stairs. I could take the elevator, but I'm just going to keep that movement. And I've really enjoyed just processing through that.
Do you remember the first time we had a one-on-one? I said, hey, do you mind if we just have like a walking meeting for the first 20 minutes or something?
That was the best. That had never happened to me before.
I remember that.
I had some people were like, hey, for this meeting, can we go and do a hike nearby or whatever?
Sure.
And I'm all about that for sure. But I had not heard of a walking meeting. But you're like, hey, let's 20 minutes up the road. And I was like, man, this is fantastic. So, yeah.
I remember that. And I was like, I was sitting for like 2 hours before that. I was like, we got to walk, but I had no time between. I was like, all right, let's just start this meeting by walking.
That was fantastic.
You were so open to it. I want to go back to something you said earlier and kind of talking about like, hey, where was like the growth in your definition of health as far as physical health only, slap a Band-Aid, 60 minutes versus like, no, it is a fuller picture than that. And the phrase you said is like taking care of yourself, which I like because you said we rise and fall on our definitions, and really when we come back to health and that phrase, taking care of yourself, we need to define what yourself is. Because from culture standpoint, we just say, oh, hey, yourself is just physical. Yourself is what you see in the mirror. But that's kind of what we talk about here at Whole Health is yourself is more than just what you see in the mirror. You have emotions and feelings and a will and just your heart and your soul that are inside that we need to tend to as well, because when those are unhealthy, that manifests into the physical health and into what you see. So really defining, hey, I need to take care of myself, but who am I? And that really goes back to God's word and what we find in Genesis, that we're made holistically. And that's found all throughout Scripture. So I appreciate that language that you added there. So I want to hit this next point, Ryan, as far as one of the main problems that we like to solve here, or we like to talk about here at Whole Health, is that health is misunderstood. That I think that causes so much confusion with people, that causes a lot of insecurities and sideways energy, just because when something is misunderstood, you're heading in the wrong direction because you think it's A when it's really B. So when it comes to misunderstandings, Ryan, and this doesn't have to be just physical health, but with what you have seen in your profession, your personal life, going through Whole Health, just your experience in general, where have you seen or how have you seen people believing ways that health is misunderstood? Like, in what practical ways have you seen that in people?
I mean, that's I feel like that's all around us, right? Like, whether it's trying to, like I did in college, just look the part, just wanted to be physically fit on the outside, whether that's people not being true to themselves and trying to muster up somebody that they are trying to be at work, or I think it plays out in a lot of different areas. It was funny. I was, health, as we talked about in the Whole Health program, like it should be freedom, right?
Yes.
Like, and that is such a huge thing. I've got a funny story. So my daughter, she just turned 12 years old, and you had to be 12 years old to go to this gym that we work out in. And so she's been all excited about going, and so we went, and she did a couple things, and some real low weight, and we get home. I was like, well, how was it? And she's like, it was all right. It was pretty easy. And I found myself saying like, oh, it shouldn't be easy. It's got to be a challenge, which is a misunderstanding, right? Like,
there it is. Yep.
Right. So
exactly.
And I was kicking myself because I'm like, oh gosh, I was trying to motivate, but I was doing it in ways that I could actually detract her from enjoying it.
Exactly.
And it's like, oh gosh. So I think just you got to be mindful of the things too, right?
Yes.
Like what is health? How do you pursue it? How do you grow in it in all areas?
Yes.
Recognizing that it ebbs and flows, and giving yourself grace throughout the process too. But I feel like it's a very fluid thing, right?
Yes.
And if we're mindful of that, we can pay attention to that. it's kind of like water. You know, if your water is, if you've ever had a leak or anything in your house, like water's lazy, it just kind of goes where.
Exactly.
Right. So if you know, if we're not mindful about stewarding our health in a way that's honoring God, it's going to drift to a place that weeks down the road, months down the road, years down the road, we're going to look back and go, how did we get here?
Exactly. No one wakes up 5 years down the road being like, man, I'm so much more healthier in every area and have done nothing. It's like you need to be intentional because the way of culture, I like to say the cultural undertow, is going to drift you down the direction of unhealth and less freedom and misunderstandings and just frustration. And I love those two that you specifically pointed out that we talk a lot about in the program is the misunderstandings of health is only physical and then health is a challenge. That culture paints this picture that, only focus on your physical health. Don't worry about your mental, emotional, relational health. That's kind of like on the side or miscellaneous or accessory stuff. But no, it is just as important. And the other one, the health is a challenge, that if it's not challenging or if it's not difficult or if it's not complex or you're not sweating or no pain, no gain, right?
That's right.
There's all those underlying tones where in reality, kind of going back to your daughter, that it's really important that you start at the level and the pace that you are at to establish really healthy habits and a good relationship with those habits, whether it's lifting weights in the gym or maybe it's just a 5-minute devotional with God. You don't have to read the entire book of Lamentations. It's like, no, start with where you're at. Start with the 5-pound dumbbell. Start with walking 6,000 steps a day, not 16,000 steps a day.
That's right.
And I think that's also what Jesus invites us into. He doesn't say, I expect you to be where you should be. He invites us in where we are to follow him right now, to take a step towards him. So
and
connected.
And with that, I know we've talked about James Bryan Smith before, and he writes a book, The Good and Beautiful God. And great book if you haven't checked it out. But it's a very what I like about it. It's a very practical book that are easy steps to grow in your relationship with Christ. Right, like one thing he talks about is being still before God. Okay, well, what does that look like? Do I have to take a solitude retreat up into the mountains? No, it's like set an alarm on your phone for 5 minutes and just practice being still.
Just sit there.
Monitor your breathing and just be still before God.
Yes.
And next time, maybe it's maybe you try 6 or 7, 8 minutes. You
exactly.
And before you know it, you're just enjoying being still before God. So
that's a perfect segue, Ryan, into this next part of like daily habits and rhythms that you really try to be intentional with. And no one's perfect. I'm not perfect. But we have these practices that we try to engage in that really tend to and steward our body, mind, and soul. What are some of those keystone ones for you? And whether you want to list a couple or a handful or a list or whatever you have, but what have moved the needle the most for you when it comes to just habits and rhythms towards your health holistically?
Yeah, that's great. And I'm like you, I don't get it right all the time, but for my time with Jesus, I like to get up early in the morning and I like to read. Sometimes I'll read several chapters. Sometimes I'll camp out on a couple verses. But one thing that I like to do as part of a rhythm, because I used to just dive right in and just open up the Bible and start plowing through. And oftentimes I'm like, I didn't really get anything out of that, right?
Right.
But it's not necessarily for me. But a gentleman by the name of Larry Green, we were talking about this the other day.
Yeah.
I think he's founder of Cloud Walk Ministries, but Larry was talking about taking time, being still before God, praying, inviting God into those scriptures, right?
Yes.
And so that has become a practice of mine when I dive into the scriptures. Again, not perfect. I wish I could do it every day. But I do. I sit down and I just say, "Hey God, I'd like to experience you in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's a word that jumps out, whether it's a theme or phrase or a verse, just inviting Him in. Hey, open my eyes, open my ears to be mindful to what you want to show me. And then secondly, as far as like spending time in the Word, if I'm not doing that in the morning, it's likely not going to happen.
Exactly.
I'm a morning person. And so if I don't get up early enough, it just kind of rattles me for the day. So those are a couple things that I like to do. I've tried fasting a little bit more regularly, and that has been good. The funny thing about fasting, I was kind of scared to try it the first time, and then I tried it, and I was like, oh man, that was awesome! Like just being fully dependent on God. Alex, was funny. Like the next time I tried it, it was about a week later. It was on a Wednesday. And I was like, all right, I want to do this again. I want to fast and just spend the day with God and be dependent on Him. And I got through the end of that day and I realized like I mustered up the strength to get through. Yeah, I prayed a little bit through, but I wasn't as dependent as I was the first time. And so it's just recognizing in me, like, I need to be fully surrendered to what God has for me. Am I just checking the boxes here by saying, oh, I'm fasting today?
Right.
So it was kind of eye-opening to go through that day and recognize, like, man, I've done this on my own strength. So fasting, reading scripture, I love worship music.
Yeah.
I was jamming out to some David Crowder on the way in. So,
love it.
Yeah. I don't know if you heard it from the parking lot. But.
I wish I did. I didn't, but I love it. Any physical health habits that you've been trying to implement lately?
Yeah, I just, I try to go to the gym and just try to be mindful of just physical health,
Yeah.
And there are times where my wife's like, how was the gym? And I'm like, it was okay. And I'm realizing, like, hey, I'm going. So I don't have to have this home run gym workout experience every time.
Right.
I'm going and I'm moving. And
it's that consistency.
Consistency, right. Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Ryan, I'd love to hit a question or two on the actual program experience yourself. So I know I sent you some pre-podcast notes. I'm kind of taking a quick pivot, but I know you're smart and agile, and I know you can handle it.
Love it.
Just about, in general, your experience with some of the whole health material, the program as far as like the group experience, some takeaways, and just maybe something that you'd leave like the listeners with if they're just thinking about it, or just like, what is it? Just kind of like add your flavor and spice to that piece a little bit.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
And
by the way, I am not looking for like, oh, hey, tell us how good we are. Please give us all the compliments. I want the raw, unfiltered feedback.
He just slid a 20 under the table.
There's a couple 20s if you open it up.
I really enjoyed the program. I really enjoyed the community aspect, especially. Like, that was awesome, seeing people chime in and encourage one another, or whether it was posting a meal or posting like, oh, I'm going paddleboarding today.
I remember that, yeah.
Like, that was just awesome. And I think if I'm speaking for everyone, I would say that people just enjoyed that in general. I think they liked the community aspect that provided. So that was one thing that was really cool. Another thing, it just helped me to, in that we talked about eating clean, moving often, and getting 7 hours of sleep.
Yeah, sleeping well.
Sleeping well. And I think those three things are, I don't know if you would call those keystone habits for the program, but I feel like they're pillars, right?
They are pillars.
And there are things that anybody can do.
Exactly.
Right? And the eating clean, I was kind of nervous about, because I'm like, oh, gosh, I'm not the cleanest eater.
Sure.
Like, what does this look like? And back to the community aspect of it is like, hey, people are posting their meals, and it's like, oh, that looks really good. And knowing that it's like, hey, we're just going to shoot for one clean meal a day. Okay, well, what does that look like? Okay, maybe some eggs and fruit and, maybe an English muffin or something. Like, oh, that's easy, right?
Exactly.
Like, people can do that. So I think that has, for me personally, just hearing those keystone habits and talking about them and repeating those often, I'm more mindful of them now. And it's like, okay, if we're shooting for one clean meal a day, it's like, okay, I've been doing it long enough. It's like, what if I stretch that to 2? Crazy, I know, right? Like,
call me crazy.
Crazy. Breakfast and lunch?
Oh,
Look out, man. Look out.
Look out. Call Nicole. He's going off the deep end.
That's right. I think it just gave me just handles of how to approach health in a practical way, right? Like, and the 7 hours of sleep, sleeping well, like, before I was like, I can get by on 6, which I can.
Right.
But, weeks later, I'm going to feel the effects of that.
Exactly.
Right. And so I've been more mindful of like, hey, let me get to bed early just so I can get 7 hours and get fully rested. So I would recommend, if anybody's on the fence about it or nervous about it, I'd say just give it a try, because the community aspect is huge. And I think you're going to feel encouraged by one another as you walk through it. So I think I love that aspect of it.
I appreciate your kind words, because one of the questions or pushbacks that I have heard is, do I have to be in shape to do it? Do I have to follow a meal plan? Am I going to have to give up my pizza and whatever? Like, we tried to make it very inclusive and accessible to anybody at any stage of health. Would you agree that it wasn't just like super hardcore, only do this. Like, we tried to make it pretty accessible to everyone.
I thought like it was very accessible. And you talked about the 80-20 rule, right? Like,
Yeah.
You can still have your pizza, you can still have your ice cream, you can still do these things, but it's just being mindful of it. And
Exactly.
So I think it's and even going through the program and seeing the community that we had some people who were all in on fitness. We had some people that were kind of middle of the road, and we had some people that were, this was kind of a stretch for them to jump out there like
Even
that.
do it, yeah.
Yeah, and I felt like even those people were engaged in the community aspect, and and I feel like they benefited from it as well. So, no, I would say wherever you're at, being brand new to fitness, been doing fitness all your life, anywhere in between, anybody can jump in and benefit from it.
It's cool.
Yeah, so
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you got it.
One of the main themes I've been picking up from this conversation that I don't even know if you're aware of, Ryan, is the word mindful and just our attention. Because what I'm kind of trying to synthesize from like some of these main takeaways from what you're saying is it was less mindful before, but as you've been more mindful of some of these things, it has really helped you progress forward. And I think we need to know what we need to be mindful of, which is what Holo Health is all about. Like saying, hey, here is what health actually is according to Scripture, how God's design of health. Health is freedom. Health is attention to manage. Here are the 7 habits of health. Here are very practical things you can do with the Holo Health program. We call it the True Health program. We give you all of that, but I can't make someone be mindful in and of themselves. I can't tell someone to give their attention towards their sleep, intentionally sleeping, intentionally eating, intentionally moving. How have you been more intentional or been more mindful behind that? Is it just been like out of desire, or have you primed your environment, or is it just like you got help from the community? What has led to you being more mindful about your health?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like you said in the book, health is freedom, right? Like everybody desires health.
Exactly.
But if the bullseye is a moving target and you don't know if you're making progress or not, first you're going to burn out. Yeah. And that's not sustainable, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a moving target, that's not benefiting anyone, especially yourself. But to be mindful, so going through the program, seeing the notifications on the thread pop up, like, oh, I just paddleboarded for 30 minutes as my movement for the day.
Yep.
It does help you to think like, okay, well, what does the rest of my day look like, right?
Yes.
Like, I would like to engage in this community thread too. Like, what can I be doing? Maybe it's a couple laps around the building at lunchtime.
Exactly.
Just to get some steps in.
Yes.
Keep moving. So I think it was just as you learn what true health is, and as you learn those definitions behind that, you have now a target that you can aim for.
Exactly.
Right?
And one of the things I hope, one of my many hopes of like takeaways that people get from the program and the course and just our coaching is that health is not complicated. It's actually very simple. And that's one of the misunderstandings that we try to hit on is that you go on Google or Instagram or social media and they paint this new diet fad or like this fruit is bad or something's going to do like X, Y, and Z, where we're just trying to confuse it and create all this noise around nutrition and movement. What's like make it way overly complicated. But in reality, there are very elementary, rudimentary, like ways that God designed us that are very, very simple as far as the sleep-wake cycle. When we actually respect that and follow God's design of sleeping enough at night and waking in the day and actually having enough energy, we can actually get through the day without feeling tired. I know that's crazy. Call me crazy. But the busy pace that we live in is actually not God's design. But when we sleep well and actually steward our mind and soul well, we don't have to feel overwhelmed. We don't have to feel this way. And when we actually just simply prioritize the foods that God made through whole, clean, real foods that are minimally processed, you're going to feel better.
Absolutely.
And when we steward our physical health well by moving and getting our steps in the way God designed our elbow joint to move or our knee joint to move, or just by walking or doing whatever, we're going to have more energy. We're going to have more strength and more freedom ultimately. But it is really simple. And that's kind of the message I wish people would take away from it is, and that's honestly when we go through our coaching as well, is we give people very, very simple homework pieces. Like, I want you to get 10,000 steps, 8,000 steps. And they're like, that's it? I'm like, yeah. The magic isn't in what you do. It's in how often you do. It's in the consistency. So it really is more simple. And I'll kind of get off my soapbox there.
Well, and I would like to piggyback on that. Like, that's one thing that I really loved about the program. Like, it's simple where everybody could jump in and benefit. And it's given me a new framework, right? Like, now I go into the grocery store because I'm like, what is whole clean foods? It's like, well, pretty much on the perimeter of the grocery store,
that's
right?
It.
Like, that's easy for me to remember as I walk into the grocery store. It's like, well, the chip aisle, probably not going to.
Right.
And not to say, like, I can still, with the 80-20, I can still, get
your chips.
Get my chips on, right?
Yeah.
But I walk into the grocery store, I'm like, oh, well, the whole clean foods are on the outside. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So, no, I love the simplicity of it and how engaging it is. Like, it really is transformative.
That's so good. I appreciate that. Ryan, as we're kind of rounding third and coming home in this conversation, what takeaways or tips would you give someone being like, hey, I would like to start stewarding my health well, make it a priority, but I want to become truly healthy. That's what we say. True health is when we're not only living in God's design, but we're taking care of ourselves holistically, physically, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually. Someone doesn't really know where to start. What takeaway or tip would you give that listener on wanting to become truly healthy?
That's a really great question. And I would say that I learned something at a spiritual discipline retreat years back, but it is stuck with me. It's kind of this idea of just kind of taking a self-examination of yourself on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Hey, where am I at spiritually today? Where am I at physically? Where am I at intellectually, relationally, and emotionally? And again, like, those things are going to ebb and flow. But
yes.
One thing that stuck out to me in hearing that is, okay, well, if I'm low today on relational, and that could look as simple as like, oh, just grade yourself, 1 out of 10, right? 10 being the highest. And out of those things, as you look at those different parts of your soul and your body, like, as you kind of gauge where those things are at. Okay, well, whatever one is the lowest today for you, what can you do tomorrow to bump that up one?
Exactly.
Right? And I feel like that's a simple practice, just to begin incorporating, that takes 30 seconds.
Yes, yes. That self-inventory, the awareness, realizing that health is a tension to manage, not a problem to solve. It's a phrase that our lead pastor, Andy Stanley, likes to use just in context of business, but it's so true of your health because it is multifaceted. We have multiple parts that we're never going to solve. So we need to think, kind of like that practical example you're giving, is which area of my health needs attention today? And kind of what you were saying is, on a scale of 1 to 10, if all the other ones are 7 or 8, but then my relational health is a 4 because I just got in a fight with my spouse, or I just got off of a hard conversation with my brother.
That's right.
I need to go focus on that. Like, that is the area of my health that needs attention. I don't need to spend an extra 30 minutes of accessory work in the gym. I need to spend 30 minutes on a walking meeting on the phone, calling my brother, saying like, hey man, I love you, I'm sorry.
That's right. Absolutely.
But it's having the tools and the understanding, and then ultimately the community of people all heading in the same direction to hold you accountable to help you get to a truly healthy spot.
Absolutely. And I would like to share one thing really quickly. I came across a great quote the other day by F.M. Alexander. I didn't even know who that was. I had to Google. Right? Like, I think he's a Australian actor, author. He said, people do not decide their futures. They decide their habits, and their habits decide their futures.
Yes.
And I was like, well, that's so great.
It's so true.
So, because like you said, it's like you don't wake up, months down the road without doing any work going, I'm the healthiest I've ever been, right? Like,
that's so true.
What habits are you incorporating in your life today? What habits should you start? What habits should you stop that are going to lead you to a healthy life?
I'll share that speaking of habits, and this is, you were kind of talking about future. This talks about our relationship with Jesus, but my wife actually sent this to me yesterday because she heard this quote. She just sent it to me, and she said, an encounter with Jesus will set you free, but your habits are what keep you free. And I'm like, that's a really cool and interesting take and perspective on that, because yes, Jesus offers you freedom through the cross, but if our habits are continually leading us towards sin or leading us towards destruction or addiction or bondage or whatever words you want to say, then we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. Where yes, Jesus is going to help us there, but when we add onto that the healthy habits too, then we can continually rely to go in a better direction rather than heading in the wrong direction. So
Absolutely.
it really does come down to our habits. But we could talk about that all day. Ryan, this has been a blast.
Been a lot of fun. Thank you for the invitation.
Yes.
So kind.
I appreciate your time. And we will see you guys on the next episode of the Whole Health Podcast. And until then, have a good one.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you want to learn more, check us out on social media or visit us at holohealth.com to learn how you can start living a truly healthy life today.